The 21st, North Carolina, that was here in Gettysburg, but he was home during the Gettysburg campaign getting married to his dear childhood friend. But his brother and relatives and others were in the unit. So he had a desire to come back to see what they saw. And his iterations are, I've seen it as Hubert, I've seen his name as Herbert, I've seen it as Hubert, I've seen it as Hubbard, it's most likely this is his dad's name. I'm going, why is this? One of the documents told me that on a muster sheet from 1864, he signed his name with an X. The entirety of his life, he could not read or write. Either his wife, or his oldest daughter, or about 40% of his neighbors. That's how poor this county was. He traveled by rail, taking about a 2-hour horse ride, as far as I can tell, or carriage ride, from his home to the closest terminus, that being Mount Airy in North Carolina. How he afford this, I don't know. Because there are a bunch of states that appropriate tons of money to pay for veterans to go. Indiana gave $20,000, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of $700,000, just for rail. And they knew they had to cover everybody. About 10% of their population was Confederates. They're going anywhere. State after state. Iowa had no regiments, and yet they appropriated 10,000. One regiment from Minnesota, 25,000. Nobody gave more than Pennsylvania. Nearly half of it. They're going to make this big. All the talk, all the time, and all the veterans groups, and all the governors in the South, states' rights, glory, and honor, and the monuments. Only South Carolina appropriated any money for the veterans to go, and they cobbled together about $3,000. There were newspapers and contributors and others that tried to gather a whole bunch of money. And in North Carolina, there was a movie house that said, let's have all the ticket sales go to buying these guys uniforms. We want them uniform and have them carry their battle flags. It was so contentious. It almost made this anniversary not happen. But we do know that H.H. Hodges did get a brand new uniform and wore it. The majority, from what I can tell, of the 8,000 plus Confederates who came were in uniform. The vast majority of the 55,000 plus, those coming to their own volition, those who were officially coming from the Union, were dressed in civilian garb. But there's this militarization of the Southern concept. We're going to go back there because it's defining unified. To what extent H.H. Hodges thought this way, I don't know, but it does speak to his perseverance in trying to get here. That this would cost him the equivalent of giving me about $200. I still don't know how he did it. Which explains why there's not many African Americans there. This is before the Great Migration of World War I, where the industries in the urban areas drawn in so many African Americans to new areas out from the Deep South. This time, they're still in the South, the formerly enslaved, in Jim Crow. And the thought of getting on these trains, these segregating trains, with groups of militarized veterans in uniform with battle flags, was not exactly fun. There was one man who had an account at the anniversary. He was walking around, and a group of Confederates came up to him, slapped him on the back, and said, "We're so glad you're here. Good to see you. We have Negroes as big as you back home." They didn't say Negroes. There's this whole idea from David Black's 2001 Racial Reunion that this was the whole idea of reconciliation among whites to say, well, let's just all agree we don't like blacks. That has been so debunked, I don't know if we need to go into it further. But there is something to be said about those traveling from the South. That they are traveling through areas, when you guys know, when you get close to Gettysburg and through the Washington D.C. area, you are seeing battlefield after battlefield after battlefield after cemetery after bad memories. I do know his train passed by Arlington. Others talked about how they had still seen the trench works and extended throughout the area. That must have been big. Well, they also said they felt like they were being watched. And they were. There were people who got little baskets and picnics and sat on the berms to see the trains go by, because this was massive special travel across the country. But they were watching for different reasons. saying, this is exciting. Look at all these guys coming. But when he got there, H.H. Hodges must have been amazed. It was a throng, the likes of which I don't know if he could comprehend anything to have seen this face. Because he gets off the train and it is this carnival. And in fact, one guy from the New York Times said, imagine the most chaotic street carnival you've ever seen, and magnified by 1,000. There was martial bands and bunting and music and all kinds of civilians all over the place. Some horses and cars and carriages and noise. Here's Daniel Sickles, who showed up, the last surviving Corps commander. And it's good to see in this photograph that he's enjoying himself. He was such a wallflower who didn't like it. But he just, break out of his shell and come down and see everybody. And then on his way from the train station, walking south, he passed by a little impromptu place called Meadsboro that had 150 journalists in it from across the country, 30 photographers, all kinds of telegraph wires hovering above his head. He would go up to the very top, and when he starts going, and what I love about the removal of the old visitor center, the cyclorama, is that we're starting to see Cemetery Hill as a hill again. Reclaiming that property and the texture of the environment is coming back to us. So credit to all of those who worked so hard to reclaim that environment. When he gets to the hill, he witnesses something amazing, a polygon 2 miles by 1 mile. Mind-blowing to him, because he looked out upon 5,000 brand new brown tents that call it the Brown City, and over 40 miles of new gravel roads, electric wires and lights, telephone wires and telephones all over the place. It was almost twice the size in population than the entirety of his home county. He sees this brand new group that's been formed just a couple months called the Boy Scouts. And they were there to help out. And many guys who were struggling just appreciated all they had to do was wave their hand. There was a young man eager to help and carry a bag, find some water. One officer said it was so wonderful, but then at the same time, these boys were not much younger than the troops I had. And the ones I lost, I remember as young forever. This is a bit funny. There was 71 nurses and 20 doctors, a multitude of aid stations, temporary hospitals. The United States had no professional nursing school in the United States during the war. We were really familiar with names like Enfield, Springfield, Remington, but we were unfamiliar yet with names like Lister and Pasteur. Bad time to fight the war. Because as we know, 2/3 who died from what? Well, they're going to prevent this. The United States government will prevent this. The state of Pennsylvania will prevent this. They do inspections of all wells and basins around the area, close 1/3 of them. They create water here that supplies 1 million gallons a day with pumps manned all the time. Fresh, clean water for these guys to be taken care of. There are inspections of cooks and bakers. A bunch of them are sent home. This is not going to be a spectacle of embarrassment. Think back to the American war with Spanish and the Philippine insurrection thereafter. So many of these young men didn't come back because they were getting tainted food and getting sick, lack of medical care. This has got the national spotlight on it, and they can't afford to lose a single man by sickness. This is a progressive era in action. All throughout the camp, there were water-cooled underground pipes that had water bubbling out all the time. The men could find all kinds of things to satiate themselves. The thing they enjoyed the most was the medical care shown to them. Largely because not only did they not really see much of that during the war, they weren't seeing it much at home. They loved the idea that during the war, they had taken care of their government, and now in their twilight years, the government was taking care of them. At the very base, close to the Cadore House, is the great tent where most of the grand events are supposed to happen. To give you an idea how big this is, 13,000 people can fit in this. That's slightly more than the number of people Lee sent forward if they gets charged. It's just something mind-boggling. They would come in around the perimeter of the camp and register, One New Jersey man remembered a Confederate grabbing him by the arm and saying, "Put my name down, will you?" And I wondered if that was Hubbard, because he couldn't sign his name.
Read to Tom's book. You know, that's the kind of topic, if you will get weary and say, well, there's nothing more to be said about the Civil War. There's nothing more to be said about Gettysburg. And certainly there's not as much room for maneuver as maybe we would like, but there are new interpretations, new ideas, new angles, new perspectives, and Thomas has done just that, and what is a truly outstanding book. I should note that he has his PhD from Middle Tennessee State. He specializes in public history as well as historic preservation. So it is my pleasure to welcome Tom Flagel.
Thank you, Pete, and thanks everybody for coming. I've been to Gettysburg multitudes of times. This is my first CWI. And I'm kind of intimidated by you Gettysburg experts, quite honestly. I love this. This has been fun. You guys are kind and warm and giving. This is actually a neat event, and you got to stay that way. But it's just been wonderful, so thank you. What can I say about this reunion? Well, it took longer to plan than the duration of the war itself. It started in 1908 with two individuals, one a survivor of Gettysburg, saying we should have all Gettysburg veterans come back and have one great last blowout. And they had to. Time was of the essence. In 1913, the average lifespan of an American male was 51 years. The average age of a Civil War veteran was 72. But this spark turned into a flame quickly. There was a meeting of the minds of the leading figures in Gettysburg. 2 weeks later, 150 people showed up. And then the state legislature started to get involved. And they appropriated $5,000 of seed money. And the War Department said, we're interested. And eventually got $150,000 appropriated, $5 million even. So this starts to become a national event quickly. And by 1912, they say, let's not make it for Gettysburg. Let's invite every honorably discharged veteran in the entirety of the war, north, south, east, and west. And by early 1913, it was obvious this was going to be a spectacle, the likes of which the nation had never seen before. This would be the largest blue-gray reunion and the largest, deadliest battle, deadliest war in United States history. And the United States was in a time of crisis that I was talking about, and people were talking about this was safe. The excitement was palpable. Most of the men who came here were by rail. In 1860, the United States had about 30,000 miles of rail. By 1913, we had around about 240,000. That's enough to lay a parallel track from the Earth to the Moon. And they were taking some of the old rail lines that exist in the war, some that were brand new, younger than their grandchildren. And they came in droves. And in my mind, how big it was, and others who didn't get a rail line or live a little closer, they walked. One day they walked over 100 miles and came with days to spare, thinking, well, I did this during the war, I can do it now. People were talking about the roads being black with traffic, with cars. The new Model T was just out. Wagons and horses. The entire area was just inundated, not only with veterans, but with people coming to see this spectacle. And Gettysburg was not much larger than it was during the war. There was only about 4,000 people who lived here. People were fearing they would be overwhelming, and gladly it was. That one of my favorite stories about this whole thing is how much the men wanted to come here. During that time, the United States was suffering from massive heat dome. I'm glad we don't have those anymore. But there's this threat, and there are people dying from heat stroke in northern Michigan. It's 100 degrees almost every day in St. Louis. There are people in Pittsburgh who take their families and sleep out in the parks for folks surviving the night, and it is killing children and old people across the nation each and every day. But still they want to come. My favorite story is John Holly from western Michigan, western Pennsylvania. 85 years old, living with his son. And his son goes, Dad, I'm No, you're not going. Because the invitation from a lot of states read almost like a threat. It said, yes, you're invited to come. Please register and apply. Do you understand? You are to be living in a tent and eating army fare, just as you had during the war. If you get sick, you cannot rent a room or go to a hotel. They're not available. No family is to come with you. Nobody but the veterans are allowed inside the campus. There should be no food or shelter for anybody else. You are allowed one carry-on. That's actually true. They're only allowed one back in the carry system. So when they do, it's something fascinating to me that is an inundation that even the organizers couldn't foresee. That they estimated it can't open June 29th, though the official anniversary is starting on July 1st. And the estimate is that we're looking at about 5,000 coming here. The number that actually arrived that day was 21,000, and growing by the minute. But some of the War Department were going, we are not appropriated for this. And others going, this is a wonderful problem. We'll get more mattresses, a bit more tents, it'll be fine. But this is the question posed by me when I was trying to find a central theme to all this. I was doing the research. You guys know what it's like. You're working on something, but you can't quite find a hook on it. What ties this all together? And this was a question posed to me by my wife, who's also my chief editor, which makes the writing process interesting. But it was a fantastic question. I answered her by saying, oh, obviously, I don't know. And she said, no, Tom. They are returning to see their enemy that they killed and killed them, wounded emotionally, physically, mentally. They're going back to a formative time of their lives when they were seeing things that human beings should not be allowed to see, and time and time and time again. They are excited? Why is this so? Even those who are not veterans of Gettysburg are passing through lands and memories that, even though 50 years old, can be quite traumatic to revisit. A great example being when Saving Private Ryan came out, there was an 800 number for veterans who saw the movie and called to deal with the memories that would be coming back to them from their experience in World War II, let alone Korea, Vietnam. If you had asked the organizers and the politicians and the business people, the vast majority of the speakers at this event, why they were coming, the answer was obvious: to save our country, yet again. 1913, the United States is struggling between conservatives who think about the good old days and progressives going, no, this is a new era. We have unbelievable strife overseas. The United States is struggling trying to keep securities in the Philippines elsewhere in Southeast Asia under control. We have a very chaotic situation and a crumbling relationship with Mexico at the border. There is threats of small wars growing into massive ones in Europe. I'm glad we don't have that anymore. This is the kind of struggle that's in their minds. Women vote. African Americans that are not using that word, being able to live as citizens. What can we do about this? The struggle of the economy, you name it. But this is the answer we get time and time again from the people in charge. But people weren't asking the veterans. I think back 5 years ago, on the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings, when President Macron and President Trump walked through long corridor of American and French flags to martial music and bunting over Omaha Beach to give speeches. And behind them were a multitude of veterans and their caretakers. And the presidents gave eloquent speeches about what it was all about. And nobody talked to the veterans. So this morning, we're going to listen to the veterans. And specifically, we're going to do it through the eyes of one person, H.H. Hopkins. He is a fascinating character for a multitude of reasons, not the least of which he was born and raised and lived in the same county his entire life, Surrey, on the leeward side of the Appalachians. From my research, he never owned anything in his life. Lived with his wife, who he married during the war.